Hello and welcome to DNET, the Disability Network. I'm Ing Wong.
And I'm Bill McQueen. People with disabilities who use attendance services usually get along well with the people who provide them with assistance. Unfortunately, it's a relationship that can lead to abuse. On today's program, we'll hear from people with disabilities who have been abused, and we'll find out what's being done about it.
Also on today's show, we'll look at how some low-tech devices have been designed to solve problems encountered by people with disabilities.
First, here's this week's Disability News highlights. The Canadian Human Rights Commission released its annual report recently. Once again, the majority of complaints made to the Commission, almost a third of them, were based on disability. At the press conference, Max Yeldon, Chief Commissioner, criticized the government's repeated failure to introduce promised amendments to the Human Rights Act, changes that would significantly affect thousands of Canadians with disabilities. He says several contentious debates, such as the one surrounding the inclusion of sexual orientation, are largely responsible for this delay.
The upshot of that debate is also to delay other amendments which are of great concern to a wide spectrum of Canadians, including, and this is genuinely important, a provision requiring reasonable accommodation of the needs of minorities and people with disabilities.
Paul Murphy, who was a president of the Thalidomide Victims Association of Canada, has announced he's running in the upcoming Manitoba election. He's contesting the seat held by NDP leader Gary Doer. Murphy, who's running for the Conservative Party, says he'll campaign under the banners of Access for All and a hand up, not a hand out. The election takes place on April 25th. The parents of a 17-year-old teenager have launched a discrimination suit against an Edmonton hospital. They believe the hospital is delaying a much-needed lung transplant because their son has Down syndrome. Michael Drapak has more.
The 1992 Special Olympics in Saskatoon. Terry Urquhart wins a bronze medal in skiing. It was the last time he competed.
He wants to go golfing with his dad. He wants to go to the baseball with his dad. He wants to do all these things. He can't do it no more.
Mo and Kathy Urquhart have been trying for 9 months to get the University of Alberta Hospital to consider Terry for a lung transplant. They say a doctor at the hospital told them he didn't think Canadians would donate their organs if they found out they were being transplanted into mentally disabled patients.
When they tell us that the reason Terry's name is not going forward is because he is Down syndrome, then there's no other question. It is discrimination.
The health minister said being refused a transplant because of a disability is wrong. But Shirley McClellan also said she did not believe the hospital is doing anything wrong.
However, I can assure my honourable colleague and all of my colleagues in this House that disability is not a disqualifying criteria in that program.
The hospital has refused many requests for interviews. It won't say what its transplant policy is. Terry's parents have hired a lawyer because they believe they have a discrimination case the courts won't refuse.
A coroner's inquest will be held next week into the deaths of Kathy and Ryan Wilkison. Ryan Wilkison is the disabled teenager who was killed in December by his mother, Kathy, who committed suicide. Although People First of Ontario and the Council of Canadians with Disabilities, CCD, had sought standing at the inquest, it was not granted. Dr. Bonita Porter, the regional coroner, ruled that the anticipated evidence suggested that the deaths were not ones of euthanasia, mercy killing, or assisted suicide. CCD proposed to show that the teenager's interests were separate and apart from his mother's. 2 other organizations were given standing at the inquest. Recently, over 1,000 demonstrators marched through the Cambodian capital, Phnom Penh. They marched in support of an international campaign to draw attention to the social and economic costs of disability caused by landmines. Cambodians demonstrated in the first Landmines Awareness Day and called on warring sides in the 25-year civil war to stop laying mines. Now, because of more than 10 million mines, vast tracts of fertile farmland cannot be tilled, and thousands of men, women, and children are killed or disabled each year in attempts to reclaim the land. To date, about 40,000 persons have been disabled. One of the founders of the independent living movement has died. Ed Roberts was one of the organizers of the first independent living center in Berkeley, California. Afterwards, he worked as the director of the California Department of Rehabilitation, a government department which at one time refused to provide supports to him. A few years ago, he attended Independence 92, which was held in Vancouver. He offered these insights into the role that anger played in determining the direction of his life and his work.
A lot of people take it, turn it in on themselves and destroy themselves, and I watch people commit suicide, and it's horrible. And I listen to myself. Or you can turn it out on your friends and your lovers and your parents, and that's very destructive and awful. Or focus that anger and the energy that it creates on making some change in your life, and it's the most powerful tool you have.
That's this week's Disability News Highlights.
When we come back, breaking the silence on abuse. A very high proportion of people with disabilities have experienced abuse. It's occurred in institutions, at home, and in the workplace. Now, with more people moving into mainstream life with the support of attendance services, this is becoming another area of concern. Although many attendants are supportive, others take advantage of their position while assisting people with disabilities with their personal needs. Sometimes the resulting abuse is violent and acute. In other situations, it's subtle. Both can become ongoing and chronic problems. Attendant service abuse is too often ignored, hidden, and unreported.
Shut up! You're always complaining. Too hot. It's either too hot or too cold. I'm doing the best I can do for you.
This dramatization illustrates one type of abuse that people with disabilities who use attendance services have experienced. Scott MacArthur has endured similar kinds of abuse in his life. He works for the Ontario Federation of Cerebral Palsy and uses attendance services. For people like Scott, abusive experiences can go back a long way. Before attendance services, people with disabilities often lived in institutions. They were even more vulnerable than they are today.
When I was around 13 years old, I was living in an institution for disabled children. In that institution, they had 2 dressing tables. They were very narrow. When I used to be put on that table, I used to get more spastic, which is part of my condition. If I got spastic with certain nurses, they would slap me in order to make me hold still.
Now people with disabilities are moving out of institutions and into the community. Fran Odette is a community health counselor. She spent 5 years working on issues surrounding violence against people with disabilities. Some of that violence and other forms of abuse involve service providers who have replaced the institutional nurses.
The various kinds of abuse that can occur within a user of attendant care services is a wide gamut, and that includes physical abuse, such as hitting, slapping, burning, giving poisonous medication, inadequate medication, sexual assault, inappropriate sexual touch, sexual harassment, verbal taunting, verbal abuse, various forms of verbal abuse, such as name calling, And that also includes emotional, which is part and parcel of a long-term effect that impacts people with disabilities who experience violence in their life.
When you let somebody slam a plate of food down on the table in front of you, you have no way to fight back. You have no dignity. It is abuse.
Not all experiences with attendants are negative. Scott has had the support of attendants who have made a positive change in the quality of his life.
Okay. So what shirt did you want?
That blue one.
Okay.
The freedom that comes from living in the community with attendance supports can make people reluctant to report abuse.
The reasons why people experience difficulty in disclosing or maybe fearful of disclosing or reporting are a variety of reasons. And that is the fear of not being believed, the fear that their services will be taken away from them. For many people living either with their families or having lived in institutional settings for a number of years, being able to now go out and live in the community with the services provided through attendant care means a whole lot of independence or interdependence. And so the fear of having that taken away means that they may have to go back to their family, where there may have been abuse as well.
So one, two,
three.
Good. Oh, I forgot your glasses.
Oh, God.
You wouldn't look professional without.
What attendant services means to me is the ability to live in the community independently and in a lifestyle I choose.
It doesn't matter what the relationship is, whether it is through attendant care services or in any other kind of relationship. You don't deserve to be abused. You have the right to tell somebody. You have the right to be believed. And so within that perspective, then you need to go to places where you're going to be supported. Some people have gone to the supervisors of the attendant care projects. That may be useful. However, experiences have happened where people have not been supported at all.
I reported the caregiver who wouldn't speak to me for the hour and a half she was there. She was banging things around, and she was just very unhappy. I reported her to management. I was asked, did she get you up? Yes. Did she dress you? Yes. Did she feed you? Yes, she fed me. So she did all your care perfectly. Yes, it was excellent care. So, there's nothing we can do. People don't have to be nice to you as long as they do your care.
They've been re-victimized, they've been silenced, and as a result, the abuse continues.
Excuse me, I've asked you before not to put the dishes there. You know I can't reach them.
If you don't like the way I'm doing it, do it yourself.
I think I'm going to call you a supervisor.
Don't you dare if you know what's good for you.
You're hurting me.
There are lots of caregivers out there who are stressed, overworked, and under-resourced, working in settings where they themselves are treated inhumanely, but make the choice not to abuse. So those excuses that we hear aren't valid and aren't to be seen as credible excuses, and they are exactly that. They are excuses. At the core of violence is around power and control, and within those perspectives, the attendant care provider is the one who has power over the individual who is dependent on them for those services. And it's that abuse of power and that abuse of control that puts us in a vulnerable position.
I've had some very serious violence happen to me.
Robin Artemis is chairperson of the Disabled Women's Network of Ontario. She feels many people with disabilities are socialized into believing they're responsible for the abusive situations they find themselves in.
I was taught that because I had a disability, I was a burden upon society, and that I should be grateful for anything anybody had ever given me, and just really put up with it. Be happy that I just have a roof over my head because nobody else wants me.
In no way are you to blame for the violence in your life. You did not perpetrate it. You did not cause it. The abuser may justify what he or she has done, but that doesn't give them the reason or the excuse to do it. You need to be believed, and there are people out there that will believe you and support you. In no way do you need to continue to take the violence in your life, that changes can occur. What we need to do is to re-examine and rethink what attendant care services are and who they're for, and begin looking at and enforcing a much more stringent philosophy that is reflective of the belief that people with disabilities are the ones who should be and need to be in power and control over their own destinies.
Every human being has the right to be treated with dignity and respect.
If you are or know of anyone being abused, contact your local independent living center or local distress or rape crisis center. You can also get help by telling a friend or calling the police.
Coming up next, low-tech ingenuity.
Over the years, advances in technology have helped people with disabilities become more independent. Nowadays, people with disabilities can be as mobile as anyone else by using high-tech aids in work, home, or play. But these kinds of equipment weren't always available, so many people with disabilities had to come up with their own solutions. They invented many of their own devices out of everyday items. We took a look at some of these items on display at last year's Independent Living Conference in Winnipeg.
Hi, this is another one of our corners. Gizmos.
Don Ament is an expert on technology. He took us on a tour of Gadgets and Gizmos, a display of devices designed by people with disabilities.
It was designed for individuals that have limited dexterity in their hands. And what it does is little devices on the top of the cue so they can still play the games, but they have a little bit of a lip on them so they can kind of lift it out and place it.
Aside from games, people with disabilities developed equipment to help them be more independent.
This was made by a person, I guess, dating back to probably about the 1940s. It was a reaching device that was made up for a person that was living in their own home, and it could be used to pick up a variety of different things. It's I guess it would pick up a sock or a shoe or something that was dropped on the floor at the time. These are some of the early intercom systems that were developed for people for independence. And as you can see, they have quite a large micro switch, which is fairly easy to get a hold of and push. What is a turkey lift? We get that a lot. Actually, what this product does is it enables an individual to transport a heavy roasting item from an oven rack to a table. What they're able to do is roll this item up to the level of the oven rack, slide the heavy roasting pan onto it, and electrically it powers itself up to whatever height you want it, the height of your table or your counter. And then from there, you're able to roll this item over with the heavy roasting pan on it, over to the other table, and then slide the item off.
But times have changed. Many people with disabilities can now find what they need in the mass market.
In recent years, there's been more, I guess because of the numbers of of individuals out there that needed these specific items, the commercial manufacturer has become more aware and starting to make products and becoming more sensitive to any of those needs that people have.
But some people are still inventing because it's still the best way for them to get what they need. As hockey player Jacob Hines recently discovered, a little old-fashioned ingenuity can go a long way in sports, too. Jeannie Lee found out how.
It's a fun sport to play, and there's lots of rewards in it.
But for Jacob, playing can be awkward. He was born without a lower right arm. But these days he looks like any other kid out there because of a simple attachment for his prosthetic arm.
Put it on the end of my arm. With the stick, I'd get an extra piece and drill it onto the stick, and then it just fits onto a piece that screws into my arm. Gives me better stick handling and shooting and stuff.
At Toronto's Hugh McMillan Rehab Center, Sandra Ramdeal's job is to fit kids so they fit in.
We get a lot of various requests for skiing, baseball, also golfing. In Jacob's case, he really wanted to play hockey, so we designed something to fill that specific need.
When the hockey season ends, Jacob Hines will turn his attention to baseball. The prosthetic department at Hugh McMillan has already developed a low-tech catcher's mitt that he can use on the diamond. We'll be right back. This is our last magazine program of the season. If you want to keep up to date on disability stories throughout the summer, there are a number of magazines available. The latest edition of Abilities has just come out. Ability Network, Disability Today, and Archetype are other sources of information.
For people who missed our coverage of last summer's Commonwealth Games, we're repeating the program next week. In the meantime, we'd still like to hear from you. Our address is coming right up. That's the Disability Network this week. Have a good summer, and we'll see you again in the fall. I'm Bill McQueen.
And I'm Ming Wong. Now, here's our address. Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W1E6. That's Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W1E6.
This program is brought to you in part by the Royal Bank of Canada, serving Canadians for 126 years, one customer at a time.